I'm here for our first interview, and I'm just going to ask you, John, what is your full name and where were you born?
My name is John Edward Vanderstar, and I was born in Jersey City, New Jersey in 1933.
1933. Tell me a little bit about your parents. Where were they from, and what did they do for a living?
Okay. I had a fairly dysfunctional childhood, so it's hard for me to recapture things. My father was born in Holland, in the Netherlands, in a town called Den Helder. He came to the United States when he was about in his early 20s, and didn't go back on the boat. I mean, he worked for an airline, and he several trips to the U.S. And then on the last one, he just didn't go back to the ship. And they put him on a list of people that they interestingly called deserters. Weird. Anyway, I don't know what he did or where he did it or how he did it or whatever. My mother came along, and she had been born in Jersey City, like me, later. And her parents were both born in Italy somewhere. I say it's in the sort of southeast corner of Italy, the country. When and how they came to come to the United States, I don't know much about, because for some reason we didn't all talk about those things.
Mm-hmm.
But I know they came from a small village, agricultural type people, farmers, and at some point they both decided to come to the United States. That would have been around 1900. My parents separated and divorced when I was 10 years old. And even so, there hadn't been much conversation about their ancestry or anything of that sort. I was too little and too young, and then they broke up.
Yeah.
My father, I think he was in the retail business. You know, he worked at some place like Sears, although I don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
And it might have been some similar company, and then he went into the insurance business, and he was in the insurance business for the rest of his life.
And did your mother work?
My mother worked her tail off to support me and my brother, who was a couple of years younger than I. She mostly worked as a waitress. Hard work, carrying trays to tables and that sort of thing. But she did it, and that kept us alive, frankly.
Yeah.
Well, there was a lot of moving around, I can tell you that much. This was what we would call a dysfunctional family.
Yeah.
And I don't remember with any recollection, of course, I don't remember where we lived this time or where we lived that time. I know I went to the public schools in Jersey City, New Jersey, went to high school there, and during that, and then I went off to college. During that living there, I know we bounced around, and we stayed in an apartment somewhere, and then another apartment somewhere else, and so on. It was not a very steady existence.
So you moved around a lot.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. So
Okay. What different schools have you gone to besides that high school?
college and law school.
Okay. And where did you go?
That gets to my first miracle story. We didn't have any resources that would support my going to college. I was born in 1933, so we're talking about 20 or so years later. We had no resources. Wasn't any conceivable way I would go to college, but I wanted to. And the faculty at my school thought that'd be a good thing.
Why did you want to go to college?
I liked the challenge of going to school. I liked going to school. And it kept me off the streets, as they say. Also, I thought maybe the economics of my life might be improved by a college education.
Okay.
So there I was in this high school, public high school in Jersey City called Dickinson. And in, when would it have been, 1949, a woman named Kane, C-A-I-N-E, Kane, died and left her estate to her husband, and then after he died, left it to a scholarship program, which I will describe in just a minute. She died, and her husband rejected the bequest. He had the option under her will to just turn it down and leave the money in her estate in the scholarship fund. And it was designed to give a 4-year full-time scholarship to a couple of kids every year at Princeton. Now that's not only college was beyond my reach, but Princeton University was well beyond the reach of everybody I knew.
Sure.
But I did, because of that. Oh, wait a minute, I forgot there was another limitation. It had to be a student from my high school, no, from Jersey City, and a town called Goshen, G-O-S-H-E-N, Goshen, New York, which was just north of Manhattan. So I didn't have much competition, and that's the miracle of it. You know, I went from deep, deep, deep bottom to way up at the top because of this scholarship fund.
What do you remember about Princeton? Did you ever run into Einstein?
I saw him once, but he wasn't part of Princeton University, which is the undergraduate college. I loved Princeton. I just had a great time there. I really blossomed as a personality. And I enjoyed that experience considerably, and I'm still very, very proud of being a Princetonian.
Yeah.
Now, the mistake I made was in signing up to major in aeronautical engineering. My circumstance at home, I mean my family and so on, was that you went to college to learn to make a living. So you went to accounting or whatever. You didn't go and study history or English poets or anything of that sort. And that was the mentality of everybody in my circles in Jersey City. And I had a sort of romantic attachment to airplanes. Remember, I had grown up during World War II, and I spent a lot of my time in school drawing pictures of fighter planes and things like that. So aeronautical engineering had a lot of logic to it. Trouble is, it was too demanding for me academically. It really was. I'd gone to this high school in Jersey City, and I just really wasn't ready to dig into such things. Furthermore, Princeton Engineering Department required their students to, in the summer after their junior year, required them to work in the industry in which their program was focused. In my case, aeronautical industry. So I signed up for that, and because of my attachment to airplanes, I made it aeronautical engineering. Well, in my junior year, I was really starting to feel the pinch of being in over my head academically. Um, uh, Princeton had a very strong engineering school, and science and so forth. One thinks of Princeton as being, way up here studying classics and that sort of thing, which it did, and did a good job of. But engineering and science were a very important part of Princeton University. So it was tough. I did get the summer job that I had to get because of the university requirement. It was to work in a missile factory. Missiles was not well known in 1950. So one other fellow and I drove to Los Angeles. He was a year ahead of me in college. Drove to Los Angeles that summer, spent a summer having a good time in Los Angeles and going to work at this job. Well, the job turned out to be not too demanding, not demanding enough. All I had to do is go to work every day, is put some numbers on a piece of paper and then put the piece of paper somewhere and somebody else put some other numbers on it. At least that's my recollection.
So, but you didn't stay with that program, right? Did you switch?
That's the problem. I didn't.
Oh, okay.
See, I just was not, at that point in my life, I was not a person who took charge of his life.
Okay, so what happened?
Well, I didn't, when I got back to Princeton at the end of the summer, that would have been the summer of '53, I just went ahead and did the best I could to take the courses and so on. But I flunked one course. And to me that was, a mortal sin. The only other course I've ever flunked was cursive writing. I have terrible handwriting, and I trace it all back to 4th grade in Jersey City.
Yeah.
Anyway, while I was at Princeton, I just had a ball. I really had a good time. I don't mean drunken parties or anything. For example, I signed up to work on the radio station, the college radio station, and I did disc jockey programs and so on, and then I started doing sports. And I did play-by-play announcing of Princeton athletic teams, football, baseball, basketball. I had a ball. I really loved that, and they liked me too.
Okay. Then what happened after you left Princeton?
Okay, well, then the Korean invasion in the summer of 1950, which was the summer that I was in California.
Yeah.
And we came back, and I said, oops, I think I better sign up for ROTC or something, because I don't want to get drafted. Well, I did that. I joined the Navy while I was still an undergraduate, on the understanding that I wouldn't be on active duty until I graduated, and my deferment expired. So I operated under a deferment for all the time it took. And I became a officer candidate, seaman apprentice, Vanderstar. That was me. And I enjoyed my Navy.
So you were in for 2 years?
4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what they put, I wanted to go to flight school. I wanted to fly
Yeah.
fighter planes off carriers in the Pacific. And unfortunately, I flunked the eye exam. And that, my depth vision didn't work too well. And so, I couldn't distinguish between you being that far and him being that far.
Yeah.
And so I flunked the test. And knowing of my interest in aviation, they put me in aviation ground business. There was a school in Jacksonville that taught all the acquainted you with all the things that aviation, non-pilot as we call them, aviation people went into. And then I was sent off to a school in Glenview, Illinois, near Chicago, called CIC, Combat Information Center. Well, CIC in the Navy is the room where all the radar sets are, and there are people sitting around at radar sets, and I am the officer in charge of that group, and we moved up to Newfoundland, and we flew a barrier, they called it, across the North Atlantic. So Soviet airplanes coming to the United States to bomb would have to cross this line. We'd catch them, we'd radio it in, and so forth and so on. Of course, they never invaded, thank you very much. But that's what I did for a couple of years.
Okay, so let's move on from the Navy.
Okay, about to.
And then what happened?
Okay. I got to know a lot of other fellows while I was at OCS and at this school in Glenview, and started to get the notion that maybe law school would be interesting. And I learned a little bit more about it just from conversations and so forth. I didn't really have any idea what lawyers did for a living. They didn't have TV shows about lawyers or about anything else. But then I went to visit a friend of mine who was a law student at Harvard. And he took me to one of his classes, and I was sold. I thought that was the most interesting experience I had had. So I took the LSAT, Law School Admission Test, and I really hit it bang hard. I mean, I got a very, very high grade. And so I was accepted in law school by Harvard, Yale, and Virginia. And you can't ask for much more than that. I chose Harvard because I just had the impression that it was the best, but it's a close call, you know. I know I didn't want to go to Virginia because we were right at this point in the civil rights movement, in which a lot of bad stuff was being done by governments, including Virginia's governor, and I didn't want to have anything to do with the state of Virginia, so I went to Harvard.
So at Harvard, did you have a favorite professor that influenced you in some way? But a particular one?
No, not really. Because there were a lot of pretty snazzy people on the faculty at Harvard Law School.
So then you went to law school, and then what happened after you got out of law school?
Okay. The summer after my second year of law school, I went to Washington and had a clerkship with a law firm. A law firm in Washington. That was a traditional thing around then, and still is probably, that after 2 years of law school, you get a clerkship. And then if they invite you back and you liked it, you make a deal. And that's what I did. I spent the summer of 1960 at a law firm in Washington. Got a feel for what life was like. I liked it. They invited me back. And when I graduated in 1961 with honors, I accepted their offer, and I went to work there in the summer of 1961. And it's a big, very classy law firm called Covington and Burling. It was very stimulating stuff. They were very interesting stuff, and I was good at it. So I had a pretty good career.
In what area, what field did you concentrate on, especially in the early years?
almost all the time I was at Covington and Burley, I was in litigation. And I don't mean automobile accident cases or domestic relations. I mean commercial litigation, antitrust litigation, all sorts of subjects. My main focus was I knew the rules about trying cases, and that's what I did for a living, really, the rest of my life. And I enjoyed it very much, and I was pretty good at it.
Okay. As you think about all those cases, what are some that come to mind that were most interesting?
Well, I did a lot of work for the NFL,
Okay.
and much of the stuff I did for them I enjoyed very much. I got to know the people, the commissioner, his name was Pete Rozelle. Got to know other lawyers in the firm who worked for the NFL, and I became very knowledgeable about sort of sports law. In addition, one of the pieces of NFL work that I did a lot of was broadcast contracts. The contracts that the networks, the TV networks, made with the NFL. I was involved in that stuff quite a bit, and in the blackout rule, which I'll tell you about sometime. So that was kind of the most fun thing, and when Pete Rozelle retired, they chose a partner from Covington, my law firm, who had been even more active than I in the legal business of the NFL, and he was selected as the next commissioner. Paul Tagliabue was his name.
Yeah, right.
Paul and I had been very good friends at the law firm, and I did a lot of NFL work with him and so on. And so off he went to New York to become the commissioner, and he did a good job for that, I think. And I stayed at the law firm and enjoyed that work.
And did you retire from that law firm?
Eventually I did retire from that law firm, but in the meantime I had established a different additional interest, and that was civil rights, civil liberties, etc. I was involved with that sort of stuff right from the beginning almost of my career at the Covington, my local career. And then by a variety of coincidences and so on, I wound up being the lawyer for the NOW Legal Defense Fund.
The what?
The NOW, N-O-W, National Organization for Women.
Yeah.
The Defense Club, and I handled a big case for them and won it, and that was very pleasing. And then I just sort of became a board member of that outfit and various other outfits, and I was very, very heavily involved, beginning in, let's say, 1978, very heavily involved in women's rights issues. And I served on boards and committees and advised people and wrote briefs and all that sort of stuff.
Is there one particular case or issue that you're most proud of with that?
Yeah. In 1978, I got a phone call from a friend of mine, a lawyer, who said, I want to ask you to take on a case. Okay, what's the case about? People do that all the time. The Attorney General of Missouri had filed a lawsuit in federal court against NOW. And I burst out laughing because she knew and I knew that that was ridiculous. Later on, I called up a friend of mine who was an eminent antitrust scholar and named Elman, and I told him about it, and he burst out laughing. So I guess I hit the right thing. Anyway, I took on the case,
Yeah.
tried it in the fall of 1978, put on a wonderful defense, and the judge ruled in our favor, and the Missouri state government appealed to the Court of Appeals, and I won that. And I really became a hero in the women's rights movement, because
Yeah.
there had now at that point had not been involved in any sort of major litigation of any kind.
Okay, let me change
Okay.
a little bit. How long have you been married? And what? Tell us about who you're married to, and any children or grandchildren that you have.
Okay. Well, I got married in '56. I worked at Covington and Burling, and that was very demanding, but I enjoyed it and it made good money.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I had 4 children, 4 girls, 4 daughters.
Mhm.
Said I have 4 daughters.
Yeah.
Before the first of those 4 daughters was born, there was another little girl born,
Mm-hmm.
but she was born with a condition called spina bifida.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Okay, it's a pretty deadly
Yeah.
disease,
Yeah.
and she was born in November of 1960 and died the following summer.
Mm-hmm.
But life was kind of tough at that point.
Yeah.
I was not a religious person, so turning to God wasn't anything that would have come to me.
Mm-hmm.
So then the 4 daughters were born, one after the other, and they're just a wonderful bunch of guys, females, wonderful bunch. But we had a lot of trouble getting along in the home, and I finally left.
Okay. So then, so you had 4 daughters.
Right. And as I guess I said before, the house, it was really pretty dysfunctional. Even though I was a high-class lawyer with a high-class paycheck and so forth, we just had a lot of troubles within the family. And I finally moved out.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, by happenstance, and now I would say by the grace of God,
Mm-hmm.
I met this woman, a lawyer.
Hmm.
Imagine that. I met this woman who worked for the U.S. Senate. She was the deputy legal counsel of the U.S. Senate. And I got involved with a lawsuit against, what was it, the Postmaster General? Anyways, some federal agency about something. And I represented the House of Representatives, and she represented the Senate, which was her employer. We worked very closely together, had a good experience, eventually won the case,
Yeah.
and that was that.
And what was her name? Liz
Culbreth,
Culbreth. Okay.
who had grown up in western North Carolina,
Mhm.
not too far from where we're sitting here,
Okay.
and went to Vanderbilt Law School, had a good record there, had a good job in the federal government, was very close to some of the key people in the Republican administration, and we just hit it off.
Yeah.
Suddenly, my association with this woman was not professional, it was personal,
Mm-hmm.
and it was wonderful. And in due course, I, after asking her the inevitable dumb question, how come you've never been married?
Yeah.
God, I wish I could take that line back. Anyway, we did get married.
Good.
We got married in Washington, D.C. We had a wonderful, wonderful wedding reception at the Watergate.
Yeah.
At the Watergate, this was an era when Watergate was becoming known for
Yeah.
something besides parties.
Yeah. Now, do you have any hobbies or follow sports?
I certainly follow sports.
Okay.
In fact, one of the interesting things about my marriage to that woman over there is that she is very interested in sports. When we got married, I was a subscriber to Ms. Magazine,
Yeah.
and she was a subscriber to Sports Illustrated.
That's great.
Gives you a little tip
Yeah.
off.
Yeah.
Well, she and I sit and watch television, watch basketball and football on television quite a lot,
Yeah.
and we like it very much.
Yeah.
And the fact that I used to do the broadcasting gave it special
Sure.
meaning for me.
Okay. All right. What historic events have you experienced or remember particularly? For example, marches or protests or performances or historical events.
Well, there I was in Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
There were more and more getting to be the mall in Washington
Yeah.
as the focal point for marches of various sorts. And almost inevitably, those marches were pro-civil rights or women's rights or something like that.
Mhm.
So that was a very important part of my life, actually. As I said, I was very involved in all that stuff. And so I marched on some of those protest marches in Washington on the mall. And I've got a shirt, I've got a t-shirt that has on the front in big letters, "This is what a feminist looks like." And it's one of my favorite shirts.
That's wonderful. How has the world changed since you were young?
I was young. I was born in 1933.
Right.
FDR was elected that year. World War II and then Korean War had a profound effect on life in the United States. There were just so many things that were going on in the civil rights movement and all that kind of stuff that it was a pretty busy town, Washington. I mean, that much of the focus of women's rights issues was in Washington.
Mhm.
That's where the government was. That's where they issued regulations about Title IX,
Yeah.
so forth and so on.
And you were right in the
And
middle.
I was
of it.
right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, as you look back on today, from the time you were born, how do you see the world changing?
Well, of course, one of the most positive signs of the world changing is the space program.
Mhm.
I'm very aware of landing on the moon and all that kind of stuff. And in fact, one of the guys who landed on the moon was a friend of mine from Princeton, aeronautical engineering student from Princeton. So I guess the wars, the civil rights movement, and the space were very much highlights of the change in
Of your life, yeah.
me and everybody around me.
Okay. I have two more questions.
Yes.
What would you say are the greatest challenges that you have faced in your life?
Ooh, boy. Yeah. Trying to be a good husband and father. I didn't do badly on the first of those, but I think I did a pretty good job on the second. Putting myself into the civil rights movement, women's rights movement, and so on, had quite an effect on me, and I hope on the movement.
Well, I'll move on to the last question then.
All right.
All right. What has provided you with the most satisfaction in life? What are you most proud of?
Okay. I guess I'm most proud of the work I did in the civil rights and women's rights communities.
Mhm.
I ought to take a minute and to get off this track for a minute, because,
Mhm.
no, I don't mean literally, because I have not mentioned church.
Mhm.
I had been a non-church goer. In fact, I was almost anti-church in the early years of my life. That was, my family was like that. That's
Yeah.
how. By some miracle, I was invited to go to a local church in Washington, local Episcopal church,
Mhm.
it happened to be. And I thought, well, why not give it a shot, see what it's like. Well, I was hooked. I was really hooked. So there in the late, 70s? Can't remember when. I became a very, very, very faithful church person. And in due course, I got very heavily involved in the governance aspects.
In the diocese?
Well, first with our parish, second with the diocese.
Mhm.
I was finance chair of the Washington diocese, for example, for several years. I was a member of General Convention.
Yeah.
I was elected 5 times to be a delegate from the Washington diocese
Mhm.
to General Convention.
Mhm.
So I served a long time on that. Somewhere along the line there, I became elected of the Executive Council, which is sort of the board of directors
Oh,
of
yeah.
the whole
I know.
church. And I enjoyed that very much. I thought I was using my different legal background and skills, and
Yeah.
I'm a pretty good person for organizing meetings and so forth. And I felt good about that. I'm very, you shouldn't say pride when you're talking about God, but that was a good part of my existence.
Yeah.
And I gave a speech, and it became an article that's in the Virginia Seminary
Mhm.
Journal many, many years ago. And I had that. And it's kind of fun to go back and look at it every once in a while.
Well, thank you so much. I wish we had more time